Can you believe there was once a ruthless man who helped change the game of baseball? Cornelius McGillicuddy, aka Connie Mack, was a failed baseball player who went on to change the way many think about the game of baseball. In the past 100 years, there have been few that have impacted the game as much as Connie Mack did. To this day, Connie Mack's name still lives on in the game of baseball. There's even a youth baseball league that lives up to his name. In this video, we are going to look back on the career of Connie Mack and his astonishing impact on the game of baseball. Growing up like many Irish immigrants during the time, Cornelius McGillicuddy would end up going by a nickname, Connie Mack. Mack would grow up in Brookfield, Massachusetts with a father who served in the Civil War. His father would instill discipline into him that would live on throughout his baseball career. By the age of 14, Mack would leave school and enter the workforce. He would end up working as a clerk until his big break as a baseball player, which would occur in 1884. Mack would jump around early in his career, going from the minor leagues to a few different baseball leagues. In 1889, Mack would take his life savings and invest in a new league with the club, the Buffalo Bisons. The Players' League, as it was called, would end up failing and would cost Mack his life savings, which meant he had to find work. He would end up signing a contract with the Pittsburgh Pirates to play out the rest of his career as a baseball player. The main reason he took a contract with the Pirates was because he needed money. Many of his teammates and opponents never thought Mack was anything special as a baseball player. If we were talking in modern terms, Mack probably would have never even made it to the minor leagues. But due to the time period he was playing in, Mack was able to spend the rest of his days as the starting catcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates. The one thing that did set Mack apart was he was a revolutionary at the game of baseball. What he lacked in skill, he made up for in smarts and finesse. He would also be the reason for several rule changes for the game of baseball. The first, which is a modern rule change, would be blocking the plate. He was one of the first catchers to actually block home plate when a runner would try to score. Mack would be one of the first catchers to actually position themselves behind home plate rather than near the backstop. This would be a revolutionary change for the game of baseball. As a player, Mack would also be the reason for two other rule changes. The first would be catcher's interference. Mack would constantly tap the players' bats or hit them with his glove on purpose during their swing, thus causing them not to hit the ball as well or even sometimes miss. Mack was also famous at making foul tip noises. Rather than a foul tip being on the final strike, it used to be a foul tip into the catcher's mitt would mean an out no matter what. So Mack would constantly make a foul tip noise to make a player feel like they had fouled the ball off and make the umpire believe it. Thus, a simple strike down the middle, he could make it sound like a foul ball back into his mitt. One final thing Mack did as a player that was revolutionary was the concept of trash talk. Now, trash talking your opponent has been around since the early days of sport, but Mack took it to a whole new level. As being a catcher behind home plate, he'd whisper in the hitters' ears constantly and tell them things that they didn't want to hear. He would find out information about them or their families and then proceed to whisper it and get under their skin. Several players who would go against Mack would consistently complain about his attitude and the things he would say, but they would always say he would never curse at them or say anything disgusting or rude. He would just get under their skin. Though Mack was never anything special as a player, he would end up playing 11 years in the big leagues. During his last 3 seasons, Mack would actually have a chance to be the player manager on the Pirates, which would give him an opportunity into the world of managing a team, which Mack found much more enjoyment out of than playing. After his final season with the Pirates, Mack would go on to coach with the Milwaukee Brewers. The Brewers at the time were a minor league team which would pay him a salary of $3,000 as well as 25% of the team. Though only being a minor league team, this would open the eyes of Mack. He would realize how much value he could create as a manager, a coach, and also the team owner. He realized how much potential he would have leading a team. From 1897 to 1900, Mack would have some fantastic years with the Brewers. He took so much value out of his time with the Brewers that he started to look for new opportunities. In 1901, that opportunity would finally come, and he would create a new legacy for the American League. Mack would join the Philadelphia Athletics as their manager, treasurer, and part owner. Mack would go on to a very long and successful career with the A's. To this day, his record still stands as being the single longest tenured coach for one team in a professional sports league in North America. Mack would end up being the manager for the Philadelphia Athletics for 50 years. He would finish out his career with a record of 3,582 wins and 3,814 losses, winning 9 pennants and 5 World Series. Overall, though, it was not his World Series, his pennants, or his wins that would end up making him an all-time great in the game of baseball. It was how he changed the game. Mack would totally change how owners and managers thought about the game. He would use innovative techniques and managing strategies that were completely different from other opponents. One innovative idea that Mack brought to the forefront of sports was buying into the process. If he didn't like a player's attitude or their style, he would trade them away. Famously, he traded away Shoeless Joe Jackson because he did not like his attitude. No matter how good a player was, like Shoeless Joe, they could still be on the chopping block with Mack, as he believed in buying into the process. He didn't care if you were a superstar or a rookie. He wanted you to buy in and believe that his style would win. Mack consistently looked for good family men or players who had great attitudes on the field. Typically, he wanted people that only focused on baseball rather than focusing on drinking, gambling, or doing other activities. In 1916, Connie Mack even introduced a code of conduct for his Philadelphia Athletics team. There were rules and regulations for players to follow to ensure that they were going to have success out on the field. Essentially, the code of conduct revolved around having players with good attitudes, that they would never cheat, and they would always be good sportsmen out on the field, that they would believe in their team and work hard, and never show arrogance. Again, Mack tried to push his philosophy upon his players, and his players typically would buy into it. The other thing that made Mack successful as an owner and a manager is the fact that he treated his players like adults. He didn't treat them like children. He didn't implement curfews or rules or regulations about how late they could stay out or party. A famous example of Mack treating his players like adults is with Rube Waddell. Rube would end up being one of the best pitchers in baseball and the superstar for the Athletics. He would be the one who would always draw a crowd, and Mack loved his style out on the field. However, once Rube's drinking and partying became a problem, Mack would cut him from the team. Mack would do several different things during his career that would make him an innovator and game changer. Like that of buying into philosophy, Mack would also bring about the concept of bringing in players who were younger and better hitters. He would consistently build from the ground up, building out teams of power hitters and guys who could score runs. He was a big believer in big inning baseball, rather than the old thought of getting on base and moving runners over. He was not a believer in bunting, and he was not a believer in hitting singles. He wanted players who could hit doubles, triples, and home runs. He wanted run scorers on his team, as well as consistent, strong pitching. This innovative mindset is a concept that we see with many smaller market teams today, like the Miami Marlins or the Tampa Bay Rays. We consistently see these teams building from the ground up, building these unbelievable talents with power hitting and a strong pitching. Just like we see with these small market teams, once the players get good, they want big contracts, and that's something that Connie Mack actually implemented and was an innovator of. Once he saw the teams were getting very good and he would build out champions, he would end up rebuilding his teams. He would never spend too much money for his players and would consistently know that he had to build from the ground up to have a successful, long career as a manager and owner. Mack would understand what his players were worth and how he could rebuild a team to make them better. He famously had what was known as the $100,000 infield, which consisted of Eddie Collins, Home Run Baker, Jack Barry, and Stuffy McInnes, a squad that would go on to win 3 World Series. However, once the teams won these 3 World Series, he would disperse them as they became too expensive. He would then go out to build another dynasty, which would come in 1927, when he built a team around Mickey Cochran, Lefty Grove, Jimmy Fox, and Ty Cobb. Again, like we see with these modern small market teams, Mack knew he could build from the ground up, bringing in young youth who were power hitters as well as strong pitchers. He also knew he could get nice complement players who are veterans that would fit in great on his roster. This 1927 team would go on to win 3 more pennants and 1 World Series, but once again, like the previous team, once the players got too expensive, he would pick the team apart. This concept, though, was also due to financial constraints with the players and other outside economic factors during the time period. Mack was seen as an innovator. He was seen as somebody who could build a team from ground up in many different ways. Mack was seen throughout the 1910s and 1920s as a great innovator of baseball. He was somebody who could build a team and win championships. However, by the 1930s, he started to age significantly due to several injuries. He also became very out of touch with the rest of the league and was not the great evaluator of talent he once was. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, Mack would consistently get confused, and he would constantly get the players messed up on his team, especially those who were young. Due to this, Mack would end up handing the team over to his children, who would end up running it as the owners. His final season with the Athletics would be 1950, culminating his 50-year career. The team would end up finishing 8th in the AL. All around, Mack was an innovator in the game of baseball, not just as an owner and not just as a manager, but as a baseball person. He would make connections around the globe of different individuals within his network who were baseball experts, and he would listen to their opinion, no matter how big or how small. He would listen to them when they had players that they believed could be major league talent and would reach out to him, thus having a network connected of scouts. Kind of like what we see today with baseball, where we have scouts all over the world with different teams. Well, that's what Mack did early on, something that was unheard of during the time period. A couple just interesting notes about Mack's career. The first is that he actually managed one of the worst teams in baseball history in between his two dynasties, the 1916 Philadelphia Athletics, who went 36 and 117. If he was not the owner of that team, he would end up being fired. But because Mack was also the owner and the manager, he kept himself in power. Another interesting piece about Mack as an owner is the fact that the Philadelphia Athletics were his only source of income. That's right, unlike other owners during the time period, or even the owners we see today, the Philadelphia Athletics, his baseball team, was Mack's source of income. Thus, if the team was having a down year, that would put financial constraints on him, meaning he couldn't sign the players or bring in the talent that he would want, thus hurting Mack. As seen in this video, Connie Mack would have an overall incredible career as both a coach and an owner. He would impact the lives of thousands of players, owners, and fans. Connie Mack was a true innovator for the game of baseball. But that being said, he's also considered to be one of the most overrated and ruthless men who ever was part of the game of baseball. That's right, many considered him to be extremely overrated, and that he only has a Hall of Fame career because of how long he was in the game of baseball. And if he was not the owner of the Philadelphia Athletics, he would have been fired long before. As the owner of the team, his managerial career was never on the line. He would always have a job, and for 50 years, he would be the manager and owner of the Athletics. That meant several seasons of disappointment and heartache in between the great dynasties that he built. Though World Series championships and pennants, one cannot deny the fact that he had several seasons where the Athletics finished last in the AL, meaning he was not always a great manager, and he would have down seasons due to rebuilding and restructuring of his teams. Love him or hate him, Connie Mack changed the game of baseball forever. Connie Mack has a league named after him, he had a stadium named after him, and he's still a name that rings true at the Baseball Hall of Fame to this day. Many people still talk about him as a great manager and a great owner of a baseball team. Did you know the history of Connie Mack? Please like and subscribe and follow along for more of our adventures. Thanks for watching. Believable Truths!